Carbs versus sugar, or in other words, breads, pastas, potatoes versus sweet treats. Which is worse for your weight loss goals? I'm breaking down the deets of carbs and sugar, how each of them affect your weight loss goals, and which one is actually worse for your goals in today's video. Alright guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's in nutrition human performance. On my channel, I'm typically talking about the science-backed and holistic methods that you can use in order to achieve your wellness dreams. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. First, let's clarify something, because all sugars are carbs, but not all carbs are sugars. Now, let's rewind a bit. There's actually 3 different types of macronutrients that your body can get energy from, and that's fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Within the form of carbohydrates, you have 2 main different forms that you can go, and sugars are the most simple form of carbohydrates, where starches are essentially just long chains of sugars. But just for simplicity's sake, from here on out, I'm going to be referring to starches as carbs and sugars just as sugars. Once any carbohydrate type enters your body, it gets broken down into that most simple form of sugars. So whether it's already in that simple form where it doesn't need to be broken down, or if it's in that carbohydrate starch form where it does need to be broken down, all of it has the same end result of being broken down into sugars. This is because in order to actually even be able to absorb those carbohydrates as fuel for the body, it needs to be able to be broken down in that smallest point in order to actually fit through and be absorbed. You can kind of think of this as 4 people who are trying to walk through a door. If they all try and walk through it once, they won't be able to go through, so they have to break apart into individual people in order to fit through. That's what's happening with carbohydrates when they're breaking down into those simple forms of sugars. So if all carbs are broken down into sugars anyway, then does it even matter if you eat starches versus sugars? Absolutely. And it comes down to 2 main factors. First, the amount of carbs/sugars, and second, how quickly those are absorbed. When you eat any type of carbohydrate, whether it's carbs in the starch form or sugars itself, it's going to cause your body to secrete the hormone insulin, which is our storing hormone. This hormone shuts off fat burning so that it can store those carbohydrates and sugars instead. So when it comes to weight loss goals, you don't really want high amounts of insulin, otherwise your fat burning will be turned off. And it turns out insulin works sort of like on a sliding scale. So this means the more carbohydrates you consume and the faster you absorb them, the more insulin that will be released at a faster rate. And a very important thing to take note of here is that insulin is known for instigating hunger as well. It does this by locking up those fat cells as a source of fuel, blocking what's called lipolysis or the breakdown of fats, and instead purely favoring those carbohydrates as fuel instead. The problem with this is that carbohydrates are a really fast burning source of energy that your body will burn through very quickly. I mean, just think of like those sugar crashes that you've probably experienced in the past, or when you see little kids who have a bunch of Halloween candy, have a huge amount of energy, and then they just crash. This is how your body responds when you're running on sugar. You get that high in energy because it's very fast burning, and then you get that very quick crash. And remember, all carbohydrates are broken down into sugar. So when it comes to achieving your weight loss goals, and with this in mind, we want to make sure that the types of foods that you're eating don't cause that really big rush of insulin that's going to shift you out of that fat burning mode and into that more unreliable source of energy of carbohydrates. So let's take a look at how starches and sugar both affect insulin. And remember, the 2 main criteria we're looking at is how many carbohydrates and how quickly they're absorbed, which means that starches inherently has a leg up over sugars when it comes to how quickly it's absorbed. Because generally speaking, because starches have to be broken down and therefore absorption is a little slower, it's not going to be absorbed as quickly and not cause as much of that high spike in insulin as sugars can. But when it comes to amount of carbohydrates, that first criteria, starches, because they are a long form of carbohydrates or those simple sugars, do tend to have a lot more carbohydrates in them. Depending on the food, this will range widely, which is also why different types of starches have a really wide range of effects on weight loss. For example, 1 cup of cooked white rice has about 36 grams of starches versus 1 cup of lentils, which has about 27 grams of starches. Because the white rice has more grams of those carbohydrates than the lentils, it will require more insulin in order to store it. And this is completely leaving out the fiber component as well, because fiber is something that our body doesn't break down for energy. So that means that if we have foods that contain fiber, it will also inherently slow down the release of those carbohydrates into our blood supply. And it does this basically by making it more difficult for the body to reach those different carbohydrates in order to break them down. So a higher fiber food theoretically should have a slower release of those carbohydrates than one that has lower fiber, because the fiber makes it more difficult to get to those carbohydrates. And because of this slower release of those carbohydrates, this can also slow the response of insulin too. Now again, going back to that lentils versus white rice, lentils have about 20 times the fiber that white rice has, and it contains less grams of carbohydrates, which means that it's going to have an overall better effect on our insulin and therefore our weight loss goals. Now moving on to sugars. Sugars are are already essentially pre-digested starches, where these sugars are in their simple form. And that means that they're going to be absorbed a lot faster into the blood supply because they don't require any breakdown by the body in order to absorb it. This also means you're going to have that higher and faster response of insulin too. Because remember, the second criteria we're looking at is how quickly these are absorbed into the body. Now, sugars are definitely absorbed faster than starches for this reason. But just like with starches, the devil's really in the details with sugar too, on the type and amount and the fiber that's included when it comes to sugar. Sugars that are highly refined, so something like tapioca syrup, brown rice syrup, cane syrup, are stripped of any fiber that they would have normally had to help to slow down the release of that sugar into the body, which means that there's essentially nothing blocking that sugar from being directly absorbed into the blood supply and causing that really big spike in our blood glucose and therefore really big spike in our insulin. For this reason, highly refined sugars, or even just simple sugars like honey and maple syrup, are some of the worst types of foods that you can have when it comes to weight loss. But this also doesn't mean that all whole food sources of sugar are in the clear. There are a ton of whole food sources of sugar that also still pack in a ton of sugar. For example, just 3 medjool dates, which is used in a lot of different type of refined free baking ingredients, contains 48 grams of sugar, which is equivalent to 12 teaspoons of cane sugar. Yes, dates do have a small amount of fiber to help to slow that release, but the overall effect on our blood glucose is still roughly the same. Now, there are other foods like raspberries and strawberries that are a lot lower in sugar, which would be a better option for a sugar source. But because sugar acts so quickly on the blood glucose supply and therefore on your insulin levels, it has the highest potential of completely derailing you and ruining your weight loss results. So if you are looking to reduce or stop eating sugar in 2 easy steps, I have a really great video you can check out next right here. Also, if you love the science-backed information on how you can achieve your wellness dreams, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.